The interesting thing for me about the G7 is that ultimately it's become incredibly uninteresting. I don't really think any of the major decisions.
Your data is valuable on the internet. It can be collected, analyzed, sold, or stolen. Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
Please watch out for comments from scammers purporting to be me or other crypto YouTubers asking you to contact them. Do not contact them.
The interesting thing for me about the G7 is that ultimately it's become incredibly uninteresting. I don't really think any of the major decisions are being made there anymore. I mean, once upon a time, when this whole thing was set up back in the 70s, it really mattered. I mean, the extent to which the people who met at the G7, the extent to which they ever made any real decisions, it was always debatable. But now it seems to me all they're doing is they're issuing grand declarations about, infrastructure plans, which nobody truly believes are going to happen, supports for Africa that nobody really expects to see. It's all becoming very clear, at least to me, that these people are not really in control, and that this is simply a show. It's most straightforward. So I think that it's difficult to discuss something that is so intangible now. It's like trying to sort of hold on to mist. I mean, it's not really. It's not. I mean, we have this ocean of words. I don't know if you tried to read the New Atlantic Charter that Johnson and Biden cobbled together. I mean, 605 pages of it. I mean, it's just one. It's a sort of phalanx of cliches that move from page to page to page. I mean, it's about as different from what Roosevelt and Churchill came up with during the war as you could possibly get, and everything else is like that too. The real events happen elsewhere, and the people who are there, they talk about things that are ultimately of no importance. I mean, believe me, I'm sure I'm right about this. I suspect that if you were listening in on the conversations, you would have found that they were mainly talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is such an inconsequential thing in the greater scheme of things.
Right.
But that's what Johnson was arguing about with Biden, who a couple of weeks ago got his ambassador to give Johnson a rebuke, and then Macron weighed in, and the newspapers are full of all of this. But they're not the people who are making the decisions. Other people are making the decisions. Central bankers are making decisions. Finance people are making decisions. Other people who maybe gathered around a certain Swiss resort town are making the decisions. But what goes on in Cornwall? I mean, I found it struggle to make much sense of it. Now, of course, the one thing I will say is that there's all this talk about the League of Democracies versus the League of Autocracies, that we've got to find something to do about China and all the rest. And I think, the rise of China, the alliance of China and Russia, that is something that they do, that does concern them, because you may not think very much or very highly of the Chinese government, but it is a purposeful government. I mean, it functions like a government does. Russia too. But again, if you're looking for a coherent plan, a strategy to deal with this challenge, you're not going to get it there. And I don't really think that this is the priority of those who ultimately matter. I mean, on the one hand, they are very worried about the rise of Chinese Russian power. They're very concerned about what's going to come there. But I don't think that they really expect the G7 to be the venue that will settle all of that. The big summit meeting, the important summit meeting that's going to happen over the next couple of days, is the one between Biden and Putin. And I was skeptical about that. I thought this was going to be an extremely vague and wishy-washy thing too. But we've now been learning that what the Americans are going to come with to that plan, to that summit, is that they're going to tell the Russians, look, we want you to join us in our great new infrastructure plan. We want you, in other words, to accept a bribe, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we want you in return to break with the Chinese. And if you don't, we're going to sanction you. I've just done a video, by the way, on my own channel about.
I didn't catch
No,
that. I knew.
No. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, but we've actually had White House officials talk about this. But the very fact that they're talking it that way again shows how completely out of touch with reality these people are.
I'm not an analyst like you guys. Putin's not going to take it on. So fine.
No, of course not.
No. What I said this morning when I was talking about this for my patrons this morning, I said I don't expect much out of the summit other than what we got in Anchorage with the Chinese, which is that we have purposefully unprofessional diplomatic relations between the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Russia. And there's a reason why it's purposeful, because the goal now, as I keep saying over and over and over again, it's just vandalism. An offer like that is an insult. Oh, here, have a few $100 million, which the Russians run a $10 billion a month trade surplus. Holy hell do they need with a couple $100 million in the United States? And if you sanction the Russians further while oil prices are rising, then all you're doing is making the ruble a little weaker, which is just playing right into their hands and making them a destination for capital flow anyway. Alexander, the last time you and I were on, I said, isn't it moronic that they're trying to weaken the ruble while raise oil prices at the same time? Because they think they can do this. Because that which the gods intend to drive mad, they tend to destroy, they first drive mad, and that's where we are. So the agenda is coming down is exactly that. It is going to be such an insult to Putin that he's just going to walk away. Now, Putin already knows that if we hear that in the press, Putin already knows this. He's going to go in and he's going to probably do something definitive to end the petrodollar because they've already signaled this. Now, I don't know that he's going to do that at the summit, but he's going to do so in response to if they turn that deal down, if the Russians turn that deal down, which they will, and Biden goes big sanctions slap happy. Okay, or Obama, or whoever you want to, whoever's actually running things, Davos, because Davos is actually the ones doing all this. Then the Russian response will be to go, fine, we're no longer selling you, the United States, any oil priced in dollars. You will have to buy them as ruble. You have to buy them off the exchanges, and then we will talk to Shanghai. The reals grade will not trade anywhere else. It will trade on our bourses or in Shanghai. It will not be priced in dollars. And since you import over 1.4 million barrels per day from Russia, hey, that's the gig. And we own it. You need it because you destroyed Venezuela and you've got Gulf refineries. So Biden, of course, will be happy for the Russians to make that move because they want to raise the price of oil internally in the United States. See, I've been saying this for a while now. And it's very clear. And you've got to watch the Brent WTI crude oil spread. Okay, I'm going to get a little technical for people, but WTI is West Texas Intermediate. It's the price of basically domestic oil in the United States. It's the benchmark grade for all U.S. oil. And then there's Brent, which is North Sea oil, which is the kind of the benchmark for the rest of the world. Everything else, for the most part, trades as a derivative of Brent, so either at a plus or either at a discount or a premium to Brent. Urals and medium to heavy sour grades like that usually trade between $3 and $4 less a barrel, and other light sweets trade slightly higher, like the Saudis and whatnot. The point is that what they're trying to do is the Russians want lower oil prices internationally, so the Chinese, and even to some extent, now that we're at $70 a barrel, the Saudis are okay with it because their currency is pegged to the dollar. On the other side, you've got the Americans and Davos wanting to make energy costs on the United States higher. How do you do that? Well, you do that by cutting off supply, cutting off foreign sources of supply to fill the refineries, because you can't just change the oil infrastructure in the United States overnight. Refineries refine a particular grade of oil, and you can't just retool them. If they refine Venezuelan heavy sour, they can't just automatically start, just switch over in a week and start refining light sweet. So these are the supply chain choke points that they are creating all through the American commodity supply chain. So it doesn't matter if you're talking lumber, wheat, oil, energy, natural gas, does not matter. It's happening everywhere. It's acts of political vandalism over and over and over again. Now, take it one step further. What are they doing in Geneva or in Vienna right now? They're discussing the reimplementation of the JCPOA with Iran. And if anybody believes that Biden isn't going to sign off with showing his ass the entire way down the line and give Iran everything they want, which they're going to get.
Yeah.
It's going to happen in the next week or two. And I mean,
Yeah.
Ted Askew was like, "Oh, they're going to walk away at the end of May." I'm like, "No, they're not." Davos
No.
wants cheap cheap energy into Europe and expensive energy into the United States. This is again how you bring the United States low.
Yeah.
And the Chinese are going to bid away all of that cheap oil from Iran and Saudi Arabia and the rest of it because their economies are open. Their economy's open. And Iran is going to come back online and produce 4 million barrels a day within a year, and it's all going to go to China, and the U.S. will be completely disadvantaged, and we're right back to the 1970s all over again. I'm telling you, this is what's happening, and we have stagflation. Like, it's so very obvious what they're doing.
No. I look just about the Geneva summit. Look, this is the article that I found, which is by Washington Examiner, and it is in fact specifically sourced to White House officials, including Jake Sullivan, who's the National Security Advisor. So you get the threat. White House officials have described the intent of the meeting as sending warnings to Putin over the ransomware attacks by Russia-based groups, his massing of troops along his border with Ukraine, the misinformation campaigns in the United States, and other aggressive actions. That's the threat. And then there's the bribe. Biden will also likely press Putin on joining the G7 nations' just announced international infrastructure initiative aimed at pushing back on China's influence in the global community. Sullivan told reporters on Monday that Biden plans to press Putin to help him provide a check on China, which is a big ask since Moscow and Beijing are aligned against Washington on many issues. That's in Washington Examiner. And then he goes on to say that the new G7 agreement will direct hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure investment for low and middle income countries that need it. And so that's it. It's a threat, and there's a bribe. Threat: if you don't do what we want on China, we will bring up ransomware attacks, you name it, we'll sanction you for something or else. And if you go along with us on China, well, we'll join you. You can join up our great infrastructure plan, which is all about sending you hundreds of billions of dollars. It's a bribe.
No, this is Kissinger. This is Kissinger's last act of vandalism before he dies. I mean, why do these people live into their mid-90s? They have a purpose, and that purpose is to destroy people. People with a purpose live forever. George Soros lives forever. Hillary Clinton's going to live forever. I mean, even if she drinks herself into a stupor, she has a purpose. Cover up every misdeed she's ever done. She's still got 20 years worth of work ahead of her. So,
but both of you are right. Putin is going to be deeply insulted by this. And not just Putin, by the way, the Russians in general. I mean, they are going to be livid. Now, because they are very skillful diplomats, they will listen to all this in silence. In Geneva, they will say, well, tell us what your plans for this great infrastructure program is. And then they will not get many plans. And then Putin is going to Beijing in July. And we've just had a big interview that the Russian ambassador has given to the Chinese media, in which he told the Chinese quite openly, this is in the Chinese media, if the US brings up the topic of China in Geneva, we will fully brief the Chinese about it. And that's in fact been openly said. So you can see how this is already playing out. But that is going to be a big event in itself, because it's again a crash against reality. But I think these people have internalized this idea that this is a kleptocratic regime and that they can buy it. I mean, that's what I think they really believe. And they're going to be shocked when they discover it isn't quite so.
Well, look, Alex, think about it. How has Klaus Schwab and company pulled all of this off? They bought everyone. All of these people are bought. To them, everyone has a price. Putin's price is Russia's security. But he just put Kinzhal Mach 10 weapons, missiles on the western border with NATO. And means the age of the carrier threatening Russia is over.
Absolutely.
Done. They can cover from Tartus in Syria and their east and their western front, along with their southern front. Look, the U.S.'s ability to project power against Russia is literally over. And it's
against Afghanistan. Against Iraq, against Syria.
I just want everybody to understand that we're going to pull all of our troops out of Afghanistan, but leave Blackwater in there. And how is Blackwater going to get their guys in there? Because Pakistan's closed their airspace, Russia's closed their airspace, Iran's airspaces. I mean, Go look at the access points to Afghanistan. So I want to know how the CIA is going to continue to run heroin and opium out of Afghanistan in order to fund regime change operations in Myanmar and Ecuador and everywhere else or Belarus. How are they going to do this anymore if they can't actually get their guys in there? Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that Pakistan is any kind of is any kind of airtight airspace or anything, but let's start the basic process of how much more expensive this is going to be. Okay, and as the costs rise, eventually the efficacy and the return falls
against the weakening dollar, which because they're printing it like crazy, and then
so now what are they going? They're going to use Bitcoin to get in and out of the country. Actually, they'll use Monero to get these guys in.
Pirate chain, Tom, pirate chain, and then nobody will know.
No, we don't want them to use pirate chain. We want let them use Monero. It's fine. I don't care. I don't care. But my point being is that it's the attrition game is how you beat them. Okay, how did Iran survive the JCPOA thing? How did they survive to this point over the last 10 years, going back to when Obama first kicked them out of the SWIFT system in 2012? They survived through the assiduous application of resistance and building friends and channels in other places. So in 2012, it was using the Turks to launder Iranian oil money through Turkish banks using gold. In 2018 and 2019, it was using Russian banks to launder the money through Russian banks into Chinese banks back again, and then everything else, and building their own tanker insurance market in order to be able to insure their tankers so that people could buy that. I mean, like all of this stuff. And once that stuff is built, then the weapon that was used to stop them has less power. It's no longer a 50 ton nuke. It's now a freaking scud. And that's the point about going nuclear in any of these situations, is that once you go there, if it doesn't work, you're screwed. And I said this 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I was just sitting watching this going, this is the way this is going to play out. This is hard. This is a harbinger of the end of SWIFT being important. And so now the question is, what's going to be replaced with? Because, SWIFT is making, deals with the Chinese over the digital yuan. Oh, by the way, just in case anybody missed that little point, like more, this is something that I've noticed about this, and I've said this before, and I want Alex's thoughts on this because you and I haven't actually talked about this particular observation of mine.
I just want to say, Tom, before you go on, because I do want to, before we finish up in about half an hour, include a look at what's happening in Europe and in particular the UK.
Yes.
But Tom, address your question to Alex.
This is real quick. This will lead right into that, which is this. I don't see the Davos crowd as a monolithic organization. No. I don't think anybody ever should. You have to look at it as a variety of bought and paid for disparate groups have all been offered their gifts. If you give me this, I'll give you that. If you give me this, I'll give you that. And they all coalesced around getting rid of Donald Trump because it was all in all of their best interest to get rid of Donald Trump. Fine. But look at what's happening today. The commercial banks are getting set up to be the bad guys. It's pretty clear that they're going to be they're going to be Occupy Wall Streeted to the guillotine, right? Who owns the Federal Reserve? The commercial banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America. That's who owns the Federal Reserve. I have noticed a fundamental break between Powell and Lagarde. Powell came out the other day and was absolutely not on board with setting monetary policy because of climate change. That was a big deal. That, to me, was the most telling thing. And Lagarde lost her mind. She was angry. She yelled at him, the whole 9 yards. Because you were putting, and Powell is a private equity guy. He's not an ivory tower fed egghead that came out of, that came out of academia. He's not a Bernanke. He's a private equity guy. He's moved real money in the world.
Yes.
And he has ties to those people. And I know this for a fact that his perspective on all of this is far different than Lagarde's or Kuroda's or Drahi's or anybody else's, because I know people who know him personally. So therefore, and they all corroborate my thinking on this, which is the following: there's a split coming between the Federal Reserve and the ECB.
Oh yeah, it's already there. You can see it. You can absolutely see it.
And that is what creates the potential for this whole thing to explode in a morass while Europe and Davos go, accelerate, push the accelerator, and the Federal Reserve goes.
Bear something in mind. I mean, whatever you think of the Federal Reserve and whatever you think about the way it's running things, I mean, it is based on a real economy, or what was a real economy, and it deals with what was a real currency. You can't say that about the euro or about the European Central Bank. These are entities that are moored in nothing. They just exist. They are. But the euro is the strangest currency system, the strangest monetary system that has ever been created. It's so of course you're going to see these changes. And look also at the kind of people who run the European Central Bank. And in my opinion, uh, Christine Lagarde is the logical culmination of this process. I mean, you started with some attempt with that Dutchman whose name I've forgotten to create an appearance of some degree of orthodoxy. That's right. And then with every single iteration, we get somebody who's ever less connected to the real world. And Lagarde, of course, isn't a banker. She isn't somebody who's been involved in finance. That's why you make a finance minister in France and then head of the IMF. And now you've made her head of the European Central Bank. She is, in fact, a lawyer, not a very good one, and a rather corrupt one. So, of course you're going to get all of this because she is part of the European system, the European political culture and system. And she's about as different from someone as Jerome Powell as it's possible to be. So, yes, there is going to be a difference in perceptions. And there will be a crash. And we're going to see lots of these manifestations begin to accelerate. As the whole system begins to unravel, we're going to see quarrels and disagreements and acrimony and anger over things like this, even if they're all in effect passengers trapped on the same runaway train.
And they are. And what's interesting is that we have this thing happening in the reverse repo market, right? A lot of talk in the alternative press and the zero hedge space on this, that you've got $550 billion. The Fed is effectively with reverse repos is trying to pull money out of the system and put treasuries back into the system, reversing the normal repo flow because the Treasury Department is dumping so much money because Trump raised all this money last year. Trump and Mnuchin raised $1.7 trillion, and they're spending it all right now. And Biden wants to spend $6 trillion, right, in next year's budget. So you have all of this money, and the banks are stuffed to the gills. They don't want any more money. So the Fed is trying to keep this. This is very clear about this. He's desperately trying to get and pull liquidity out of the system, and he can't. There's no place to put it. And so this is again domestic fiscal policy. Working against the monetary policy because they need to now discredit the Fed completely while the ECB tries to hold everything together. So they keep the dollar weak, which Powell's not really down with either one way or the other, while the euro stays strong in order to justify negative interest rates because you still have rising interest rates and all the benchmark rates. I keep watching the French 10-year, the German 10-year carefully because Lagarde is monetizing her tushy off here, right? Trying to keep those markets from degrading. You don't want to see bond yields rising in German 10-year debt. Okay, that's bad for all of Europe. Okay, so and the way you do that, there's two ways of doing that. You either monetize the debt faster than people are willing to buy, then it can be created, driving bond yields down, driving prices higher, or you keep the currency strong so that anybody buying that debt in the free market, not that there's much of one for European sovereign debt, you keep it high in order to keep the yield spread, the currency yield spread positive. And you keep European pension funds in there at a positive real spread. That's what they're doing. And so this has been going on for 2 years now. And the question is, at what point does Powell just say, you know what, to hell with all this, and we taper? And we taper. And we tell Lagarde to go scratch. Because I think that's coming. Because I agree with that. What I see in the crypto space is all of Wall Street realizing that they're behind the curve and they're about to get thrown over. They're about to get thrown under the bus by Davos badly, and Biden's doing it, and Obama's doing it, and they're not going gently into this good night either. And so that's why they know where the money is. Kevin O'Leary at Bitcoin 2021 was saying, look, there's $1 trillion worth of money that wants to flow into crypto, real institutional money, but can't go in there because the commies, because of ESG, environmental social guidance, they can't get sign-offs on the fund. The funds can't get the sign-offs because Bitcoin uses too much energy and it's not green enough and blah, 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 and all this. It's all just commies munging up the works again, as always, everywhere, all day, every frickin' day. And so when you put it all together, it's so very clear that Powell's going to taper faster than anybody expects. And I expected a virtual Jackson hole later this year.
Mm.
If there's a further fallout between the ECB and the Fed, it's going to be there because JP Morgan is not going to be sacrificed. They want in, and they're not going to be cut out. Goldman Sachs wants in, they don't want to be cut out. BlackRock is buying up suburban neighborhoods all around the United States and pricing people out of the market using free money to buy up all to price everybody out of their suburban homes to force us all back into the cities. Like, this stuff is real, guys. It's happening all over. And I think that at some point, everybody to the left of me, and I'm much more centrist as a libertarian than people want to admit. Everybody to the left of me better get it through their heads that right now, like it or not, the commercial banks might actually be your best friends, because it's the central bankers that are the real problem. And scares me to no end to say that in this moment in time, when I read the multi-tier chessboard, the Federal Reserve is my ally. Because that's how bad and how evil Europe is.
So how is this, Tom? How is this going to play out in Europe, Alexander?
I'll leave this for.
How is he going to play out in Europe? It's a very, very good question. I mean, I was talking to people in Italy. Tom knows who they are.
Yes,
I had a very, very productive conversation with them. They were talking to me about how difficult the situation is in Italy, how Italy has been essentially destroyed economically and hollowed out, and they're seriously worried that the country may break up. We could be heading towards systems collapse, not just in Italy, but in many places. And Germany also, by the way. I just wanted to say there's been a misunderstanding in some quarters about the political situation in Germany. What we're seeing is a rally towards the CDU, not because Germans are happy, but because they've become worried about inflation. And because they're becoming worried about inflation, they are rallying behind the party which they think is the best party to prevent that. But if that doesn't happen, and it's inconceivable that the CDU is going to be able to break with the system, which it has largely been responsible for creating, then, as I said, you're going to get a big, big crisis in Germany too. So I'm going to say this: systems collapse, which is, by the way, grim, I think is now starting to appear on the horizon. We're some distance from it, but not very far. And already, and again, Tom is probably more familiar with this than me, I understand that financial markets in France are starting to show signs of increasing panic. So, which is being attributed by some people to Marine Le Pen's rise, and no doubt that has a role to play. But I don't think that's the main cause or the main explanation. And again, I know France very well. I know many people in France. And again, the sense of malaise there is exceptional. So systems collapse in Europe. I don't know quite how long it's going to take. Tom said that Austrians are very good at predicting events and very bad at predicting the timing of events. I could say the same about myself, by the way, but it is coming. I mean, it is. You could see it increasingly on the horizon.
Okay. Yeah, no. And what's the source of, if it's not Marine Le Pen on its own, what is the source of it in France?
Because the situation in the economy is so destabilized. I used to know France. I used to live there. And I recently, it was about a year ago, I went to a town called Figeac, which I'd never been to before, but it was exactly the kind of French town that I used to know very well. And it is astonishing to see how hollowed out France has become. How the way in which people live there is becoming increasingly difficult. And this is something that people sense. They sense that the economy as it is operating at the moment is unsustainable. They see a political leadership in Paris which is completely out of touch. They don't see any real solutions to the problems of France. And this is now starting to affect the money markets, the financial markets, which are basically showing increasing lack of confidence in France. Bear in mind that France has now overtaken Italy as the European Union's biggest debtor.
Wow. Okay. And then in the United Kingdom, Alexander, Tom, anything you want to say about what's happening there and how that's going to shape?
Fundamental problem for me about the United Kingdom is that we've made a big decision, which was Brexit, very big decision, but our political system is clearly unfit for purpose, and there is no leadership politically that is remotely up to the challenges, the enormous challenges that we face in moving forward. I mean, there are many problems, obviously, with Brexit. I'm not going to pretend they're not. There are many structural problems within British society. But the Conservative Party, it's now quite clear, is not a coherent political force that's able to take things forward. And the Labour Party is going backwards. It is plunging back.
Labour Party? Is there a Labour Party?
Well, there isn't. I mean, you're a good point, because there isn't. I mean, it is disintegrating. It is now in a advanced stage, in my opinion, of complete collapse. So we have no real sense of direction. We are again, it seems to me, in Britain, marking time, and time is not very. There isn't very much time, so we're eating away at the opportunities that we have, because we are not using the time that we have in which to make the most of those opportunities very effectively. And to come to what I suspect you want to talk about a bit more, Rich, what generally happens is when a political regime finds that it has no real ideas and no real authority, it becomes more authoritarian, and that, I suspect, is what you want to take us forward with.
Just on that, I mean, we're recording this on Sunday. It will go out a day or so later. So we're recording this on Sunday, the 13th of June. And the talk is that lockdown, which was going to be relaxed on 20th of June, is going to be extended for 2 weeks, 4 weeks. And then a government advisor, or somebody in the government said, oh, we should lock down until spring, which I personally don't think is long enough. I think we should lock down all the way into the afterlife as well, so that we never ever, because then we definitely will be safe. We won't die at all of anything. But it just, when you said about no leadership and no addressing the problems, all they're doing is aggravating the problems, creating problems, completely impoverishing the nation.
No, I mean, Alex, I think you and I spoke about this during Brexit. I said then, the price that you're going to pay for Brexit is going to be the destruction of your political system. And the destruction of your society. And I said, y'all have to be prepared to gird your loins if that's what's coming next. And then, with the inauguration of Biden, any friends that the Brits had are gone. Because now you've got Biden saying you should go back into the single market. Now you've got Biden saying, you should go back into the EU. Like Brexit is never going to happen. It's to use a phrase that the person who hangs out on my blog all the time and spars with me about, certainly crypto, he says, it's their revolution, not yours. And that they always turn, this is what they're very good at doing, which is turning defeat into victory longer term. And by thinking ahead, but really what they're doing is they're expending political capital at unbelievable rates, right? And eventually they run out of political capital, all they have left are guns, okay? And that's where we are now. And once the guns come out for real and the outside voice says, we can't allow you to escape because God forbid you want to retain anything. Once you get to that point and they're nakedly authoritarian in that respect, that's when everything changes very quickly. I don't in any way, matter, shape, or form envy what's going on in Europe, because Europe is so small, geographically speaking, and there's so much, and it's so concentrated in that respect. They're not going to be able to do to the United States what they think they're going to do to the United States, simply because the United States is too damn big, and we're just too unruly. Okay, and it's we're fundamentally too self-sufficient, and in that respect. But and that gives me some hope. But at the same time, it's going to cause the dissolution of what is currently the United States. And look, I actually welcome that, because I think the United States is too big, but not for the reasons that they want it done. Okay, and what scares me more than anything else is that they think that the goal here is to destroy the UK. You've broken away from the European Union. Fine, we're going to break you up into component parts and take those and claw those bits back and just isolate the little Britons. And I think it's clear what they're doing, and it's clear how they're operating. It's clear that Tony Blair believes that that's what's going to happen next. I mean, he came back from the political graveyard because they don't have it. When they're bringing Tony Blair back out from the political graveyard, they're desperate. But they still have power and influence. They still have the ability to write bad regulations and bad rules and insert, and activate the bureaucracy in the worst way imaginable and just slow everything down. Yes, and that's what they're doing.
Sorry, Tom. I have a visceral reaction at the mention of his
Tony Blair. I know. It's the same way I have whenever anybody mentions Angela Merkel. I just like.
I was saying, I was having a conversation with a friend about the vaccination drive. The injection drive, because Tony Blair was on TV this week. He was saying that people who choose not to be injected shouldn't have the same freedoms as those who choose to be injected. And I say to a friend, look, it's really, really simple to work out your positions. Wherever Tony Blair is, do the opposite.
Do the opposite.
Do the opposite. That's really clear. I don't want to be on the same side of the political divide as that mass murderer.
By the way, that's really good market analysis as well. Whatever Goldman Sachs says, do the opposite, because they've already taken the opposite side of the trade.
I mean, the very, very interesting phenomenon in Britain, actually, is the sort of creeping rehabilitation of Tony Blair. I mean, he's all over the place now. I mean, he basically, I mean, what calls itself the
I am going to have to censor his name. Just a beep, beep, beep.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Satan himself.
But it is a fact. I mean, all his acolytes are now back running the Labour Party, essentially. Right. I mean, I don't know whether Rich feels the same way about Peter Mandelson, for example, but he's back now in his pod. And we have endless interviews from TV all over the place. I mean, he's once again being considered, a sort of person to look up to. It's as if all the things that we found out about him, the Honors Harris scandal, the Iraq War, all of that, it never happened. Perhaps it didn't. Perhaps it was all invented. Perhaps it all vanished down a memory hole. But I mean, this is quite remarkable to see how he's resurfacing. And again, it tells you a great deal about the nature of the political class in Britain. It's important always to remember that Brexit was not something that came from above, it came from below. Mm-hmm. The political class didn't want it. No part of it wanted it. Boris Johnson rode the wave, and it took him to Downing Street. But he didn't create it. It's not something. It wasn't an elite quarrel at all, and that makes it extremely unusual. But it also makes it extremely unstable, because without elite support, it means that the political system is already looking for ways to go back to what it knew, as opposed to go forward with what perhaps the situation, the time calls for.
Yep. And meanwhile, Europe is slowly crumbling and disintegrating anyway of its own accord.
I don't think it's slow. I think it's very fast. It looks slow. It looks slow from the outside. If we're talking about the other person that Tom mentioned, who raises his hackles, who's Angela Merkel. She also raises my hackles too, by the way. But in a sense, she does remind. He's like a kind of Metternich figure. Metternich was this Austrian statesman who basically held everything together in Europe in the early 19th century, was a tremendous force, not for conservatism. This is a misconception. He was a force for immobilism. He didn't allow things to change or develop. And then eventually there were protests in Vienna over some fairly minor thing, and he left. He was forced to resign. And at that point, suddenly, the whole structure that he had headed, and which had seemed so strong for so long, suddenly imploded. And you got revolutions, and then you got a whole new set of things happening: Italian unification, Prussian reunification, German unification, all kinds of things. And the whole Metternich system collapsed. And I suspect that with Merkel gone, she was both the person who, in a way, engendered all the deteriorations that we've been talking about. But she was also, in a kind of way, the single figure that kept the whole thing together in a kind of way. So remove her from the scene, and all the problems that have been developing under her will rise to the surface, and they'll become uncontainable. So that's what I think we're heading for. And I think that it's not a slow deterioration at all. I think it's a rapid one, and it's becoming more rapid still. And the fact that Christine Lagarde is getting angry with Jerome Powell is another manifestation of it.
Yep, and I think that the German elections this fall are incredibly important. I think I think Jackson Hole for Powell is going to be very, very interesting, because look, it's not just Germany that's running negative interest rates, negative real rates. It's us. I mean, inflation is horribly understated here, horribly understated. The commodity cost push inflation, with wage stagnation, is and massive money printing. This is the 1970s all over again. And we have an even worse problem, which is that now we're just paying people to stay home. I was reading something the other day. I was working on the stuff for my newsletter, my patrons, and 1.1 million truck drivers needed in the United States. That's how bad the shortage is.
Yes.
1.1 million truck drivers. Okay, so you can't move freight in a country where 70% of its freight moves by truck.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and that's everything. That's lumber, timber, grains, toilet paper, iPhones. It doesn't matter what it is. You don't keep Walmart stocked. You don't keep Amazon stocked. Like none of this, and the same, and this is being deliberately done.
Yeah.
Okay?
It is very,
and costs are rising from the ground up.
yes.
And once costs, so, we're talking about real 10% inflation rate for things that matter here in the United States, and there's no place to put your money. And people wonder why people are moving into cryptos. It's nonsense.
Indeed. And can I just say that to my mind is also an early symptom of hyperinflation. I'm not saying, if you get a situation where inflation is actually undercutting production and economic activity, and yet prices continue rising, that is a sign that you're not in a conventional inflation situation.
No, the United States has gone through two hyperinflations. No one wants to admit that they are. One was 1933, when the price of gold was revalued from $20 to $35 an ounce overnight, and the banking system was closed by FDR. That was a stealth devaluation and hyperinflation of the United States dollar by 75% in 20 minutes. So, like the biggest, quickest hyperinflation of all time.
Yeah.
Second one was the 1970s, where Paul Volcker had to raise interest rates from like 4% to 21%, 13% on the 30-year, the prime rate from to 21%, while the price of gold went from $150 an ounce to $880 an ounce over an 18-month period. That's a hyperinflationary event, guys.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. It is. Okay. It was just took 10 years for the prices to adjust to that level, but it was a hyperinflationary event. Okay. Now, you can't really have hyperinflation in the core economy until it's no longer the core economy. Okay. On this point, I agree with Martin Armstrong. On the other 2 points, I don't agree with Martin Armstrong. Those were hyperinflationary events, and Martin refuses to accept them. The situation, as at the end of the day, we are not going to give up this incredible gift and outrageous advantage called the world's reserve currency without a fight, politically. Meaning, Biden and Obama have to do as much damage as possible between now and then to ensure that any correction in the opposite direction that happens post-2022 leads to the destruction of the United States, not a restoration of it. That's what they're in the process of doing right now. Okay? They're going to destroy cattle herds in this country such that we can't feed ourselves. All right? Or supply the rest of the world with meat as we have done in the past, and wheat and soybeans and everything else. That's what they're going to do. It is inevitable that the Republicans will retake the House, and a Trump wing of the Republican Party will be large enough post-2022 to put the kibosh on all of this. At that point, the United States turns incredibly hawkish. We get a Federal Reserve chair, or we unleash Powell, who then raises interest rates and guts the rest of the world, because that's what's coming. Because we're not going to give this up lightly. And the minute things start to fall apart politically in Europe, which should start happening in the middle. Merkel leaves the scene in late 2021, and Armin Laschet can't hold Germany together.
Yeah. Then
guess what? Confidence in Europe will start to collapse. Capital will flow out of Europe. The euro will drop. Rates will rise there. We'll get the beginnings of another political turning in the United States, and the further liquidation, the attempt at liquidating most of Europe, that capital is all going to flow away. Now, once that happens, the dollars will start to rise, and it will allow interest rates along with a rising dollar in order to have that happen. The Europeans are going to have the opposite. They're going to have a fall of confidence because they're not a core economy. They're trying to make it into a core economy today by destroying the United States, and they're not. They can't do it. The euro is not going to become the world's reserve currency.
No,
right? It's not going to happen. Certainly not going to happen in the next 18 months. No matter how much Putin puts into the euro. Putin's not dumb. He's buying euros now. He's buying European debt now with all of his corporates because he knows in 2 years he's going to be selling it all back. He's going to be paying it all back at 75 cents on the dollar. He's not dumb.
No. I completely agree with that. I mean, again, I think this is I think you've explained the Russian thing about the euro as well, actually, pretty well. It's also a transitional thing. I
Mhm.
mean, I mean,
Yeah, well,
they
absolutely.
have they have to protect themselves from dollar from
And they have
sanctions threats.
tremendous exposure to the euro because the Europeans are still a major part of their business. So it makes perfect
Absolutely,
sense to have
absolutely.
plenty of euros in their foreign exchange and sovereign wealth fund.
Absolutely.
So no, I mean,
Absolutely.
they'll be done.
But wait. As soon as they can, they will dump the euro too.
Oh, absolutely.
What they will move into, I'm not sure, but that's what they would want to do. At the moment, they have to go for the
If
euro
Putin
because
was smart, he would legalize Bitcoin, and that would be the end of it.
no.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Very, very interesting times ahead.
Yes.
Always interesting talking to you both. Always interesting listening to your analysis on your channels. Any last words either of you want to say before we finish?
No. 2021 is going to be the year that people will remember. 2020, 2021. This is the pivot. This is the change. I mean, we're going to look back on this time, on this, in this year, in these 2 years, especially this year, when we will see that these are seminal moments in human history. What's going to come after, what kind of world it will be, that one can't predict. But the world we have known is reaching its end point. That I'm absolutely sure about.
No.
Thank you, Alexander. Tom, any last words from you?
I will
Apart from about Bitcoin.
reiterate what Alex just said and say that because of everything we've laid out here today and all the disparate agendas and whatnot, you're going to see this great, spectacular experiment fail miserably and cause maximal amount of damage to as many people as possible. It scares me to no end. I think about it and I can't not lose my mind. This is what animates what we do, guys. And I'm privileged to be able to do it with people who are as brilliant as Alex and who facilitate it, because you facilitate these things as well. So don't ever take, this is all I can say to the audience, is don't ever take my frustration with all of this as any kind of these are the real villains.
Yeah.
We have to understand who the real villains are in the world in order to be able to understand how to counter them and how they think.
Yeah.
These are the real villains. Period.
Yeah.
The great weakness at the moment is politics. The political system everywhere, at least in the Western world, is so broken that we don't have yet an articulated alternative to the politics that are driving it. I mean, there was a major attempt in the United States. It's what the Trump thing was all about. Putting aside all his various flaws to find a solution. We saw something similar, by the way, in Britain in a much smaller way, with the Corbyn movement, which had it had a different starting point. It approached things in a different way. It may not have been very successful in what it was looking for, but it spoke to the underlying malaise. But the fact that both of these leaders were closed off is another sign of a political system, of a system, not just a political system, that is closing off alternatives to itself. And that is also a symptom of collapse.
Yes. Yes, it is.
If you know your history, you will always see this. And I don't know what's going to come afterwards, but there will have to be some kind of political.
Well, Alex, you make the point all the time. Alex, you make the point all the time, which is that Davos wants weak leaders, weak governments, in order to be able to advance their plans. Because with weak governments and weak leaders with midwits, for lack of a better term, and a strong bureaucracy and then they just push through whatever regulation they want, and they use bureaucracy to ensure that nothing ever changes. The civil service in Britain was the biggest opponent of Brexit.
Absolutely.
Right? And we're still dealing with the vestiges of that. Hell, I was watching the new Jeremy Clarkson series on Amazon last night where he's being a farmer. The ape is farming. And he's getting into it with his builder who's yelling at him all this rain that was happening. And the builder looked at him, this is all this global warming. I mean, you faffing about in sports cars for 20 years and Jeremy just looks at him and goes, oh my God, what rotten nonsense. And then gets in his car and his Range Rover and drives away. His V8 Range Rover, right? It's hilarious because it is. It's complete rotten nonsense. But they have just we live in a narrative-driven world. We don't live in Alex at the beginning talked about the lack of reality. Well, they've created a matrix, and the problem is that they believe the matrix is real. They believe that whatever simulation they create for us, to use the whole simulation theory thing, which I don't buy into, but they believe that if they can just do that, it's a reality-based world, and we create the reality that you react to, which is what Dick Cheney said all those years ago. That's their mindset. And they firmly believe that they can do that. I mean, you think they don't firmly believe they can do that? Jeffrey Toobin is back on CNN after masturbating on a Zoom call. Like, the guy should never work in polite company ever again. But there's Tony Blair, same thing, right?
Okay.
No bad deed ever goes unrewarded. No good deed ever goes unpunished. That's
right. So I'm gonna end this because we could have many, many last words. But when you mentioned that man again, Tom,
yes,
it really is time to stop. Alex, Tom, thank you so much. I so appreciate this. I learned so much from these conversations. I'm not sure, I don't always agree with you, but I'm always open and receptive to what you got to say and see how it flows out. And from your channels, I learned so much. I listened to all your shows. So I recommend anybody who's watching, go check out Tom's channel and also Alexander's channels, the-duran, and his partner Alex Christoforou, and the-duran.com. And just thank you both very, very much. If you have any comments, put them below the video. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with crypto profits. This is Crypto Rich and Crypto Tom and Crypto Alex signing out. All the best. Bye bye.